So this is the story of the worst day of my entire life so far. I was just 15 at the time, babysitting my little sister who was a toddler, like about that kind of age where she could walk and open doors. My parents were making a quick run to the store and left me in charge. I was chilling in the TV room. Sis was in her bedroom playing with her dolls or whatever. After a few minutes of watching TV, I noticed it was a little too quiet. I checked her room and she wasn't there. I checked everywhere else with growing alarm, looking and calling for her, but she was nowhere to be found. To my absolute horror, I realized the person I'm supposed to be babysitting is definitely no longer in the house. There was this kids' swing park across the street that she liked, and this wouldn't be the first time that she worked the doorknob successfully and toddled over to play there by herself. So I sprinted over there to look for her, running on pure adrenaline and panic. But there was still no sign of her. I spotted a group of 3 grade schoolers there, so I described her and asked them if they had seen her around. One of the boys told me he saw a girl matching her description get into a blue car. We don't own a blue car, nor do any of the family friends. I can't adequately describe the feeling of dread, panic, and hopelessness that completely overwhelmed me. It was kind of feeling like my heart actually fell out of my chest. I sprinted from one end of the block to the other, hoping to catch a glimpse of this blue car. I ran through and around the adjoining elementary school, hoping maybe she was there. Never mind that I'd already been told that she had gotten into a stranger's car. I was completely irrational, was hoping that I had misheard that kid or something, or maybe, please, God, she was back. After some kind of eternity, I ran back home to call 911. By this time, my parents were back, and lo and behold, my sister was with them. It turns out she did open the door and wander off, but only to the store and back. A stranger had asked her where she lived and then walked her straight back to her house since it was obviously dangerous for her to be out alone. In my panic, I'd completely missed her coming home, and I was furious as to why my parents didn't think to notify me, so I guess it ended okay. I locked myself in the bathroom and sobbed for a while. Then I was overcome by an overwhelming urge to punch this little turd who had lied to me. I bolted back to the playground with no clear plan in mind. He wasn't there when I got back. I suppose that's good because I was sufficiently older, bigger, and utterly blind with rage that I probably would have murdered him at that point. An apology, however physically coerced, would have been nice though. Oh, and I'm fairly certain the boy wasn't just mistaken. After all was said and done, I recalled that one of the kids in his little group of friends had started to chime up when she saw me running around in a panic. I just vaguely remember her saying something like, "Hey mister, you should know about your sister." Something in the tone of her voice was apologetic, like she realized how messed up their joke was. But I was completely irrational at that point and ran off to keep searching, and it failed to register until later. Point being, there's a reason why the front page of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy says, "Don't panic." Never truer a word said. So this story isn't about me babysitting anymore, but rather a close relative babysitting me and my sister when we were much younger. My parents told us the story when we grew up, and honestly, this has to be one of the last things any babysitter would want to happen to them or anyone in their guardianship. We wince every single time they retell it, and I'm guessing you will too. My parents had decided that they were going to have a little date night for the wedding anniversary and called up a family member to see if they would babysit us for the evening. She adored babies and would always play with us when she would occasionally visit, so she must have appeared to be the best person for the job. Although by the end of this, you might well dispute that idea rather violently. My parents were in the living room getting ready to leave for the night, and we were in our room playing with her. After a little while, she starts throwing me up and down in the air in that playful way that grown-ups do with kids sometimes. Apparently our dad happened to notice this and warned her to be extremely careful since the ceiling fan was at full blast, but decided she was aware and responsible, so he just headed back to the living room to carry on getting changed. After a few more playful tosses in the air, she put me down and started to do the same thing with my sister. Except she wasn't quite as lucky. According to my dad, no more than like 30 seconds had gone by when a loud gasp, followed by a blood-curdling scream, echoed all around the house. My parents came rushing to the room, and what they witnessed was something my mom has never, ever been able to get out of her head. She just stood there in shock for a moment, surveying the pure horror of the scene before her. Our babysitter had accidentally tossed my sister into the fan while it was still on, and it wasn't one of those flimsy, cheapo ceiling fans that you can pick up from a Walmart. It was one of those solidly built steel blade fans, built with safety features, sure, but still super heavy. Also, the fan setting was thankfully not set to high, but only to medium. God knows what the damage would have been if it was. And the way my mom tells the story, for the first few moments after walking into the bedroom, she thought my sister was dead. Blood was splattered all over the wallpaper, almost as if someone had been brutally beaten. My sister was on her bed's blood-soaked sheets with a huge gash on her forehead, and you can only imagine what kind of horror was going through our babysitter's mind. An ambulance quickly came to get her cleaned up and was given a lot of stitches in her forehead. My parents were more than relieved the blades didn't strike an eye, that she actually only managed to pick up superficial injuries. The babysitter didn't come around after that, even though everyone got over it pretty quickly since it was an accident. She still has the scar on her forehead today. We would joke around about the scar and how it was actually my plan to take her out to be an only child, or how she got her scar wrong and it's supposed to zigzag like Harry Potter's lightning bolt scar. I suppose, at best, it's an interesting story to tell if anyone asks her about the faint scar on her forehead. During my teenage years, my family and I lived in military housing here in the U.S. A few doors down, there was a new couple with 2 kids who were referred to me since I made a little weekend cash working as a babysitter for some of the families who lived in base housing. Their house was pretty bare and undecorated since they had only been moved in there for like a week or so. When I arrived, my mom was showing me around the house with the 3-month-old baby in her arms, showing me where the baby's formula was kept, where I could get myself a bite to eat and stuff like that. I had to admit that I was a little worried about that particular job. 3 months old was by far the youngest baby I'd ever sat for, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't think that mom was having similar thoughts. However, they were only going to go to their welcoming event for a couple of hours, and it was right there on base though, so not very far at all. I mean, what could possibly go wrong in such a short space of time? Well, something did go wrong, and it occurred at the very top of the staircase as her 3-year-old called her and she followed me down. A strap on the mom's flip-flop snapped off and she suffered a terrible fall, completely taking me out as she toppled hopelessly down at the bottom, and as she did, she ended up dropping the baby from her arms. Honestly, I'm not sure how it happened, as I'm not exactly famous amongst friends for my agility, quite the opposite in fact. But as I was being sacked, I reached up and just sort of snatched the baby out of the air, grabbing a hold of her onesie and holding her up high as we all hurtled to the bottom. I ended up with a black eye and some bruises where the mom essentially bowled me over, and I thank God whenever I think about this, the baby was luckily completely unscathed. Whereas the mom, she ended up with an open fracture of one leg, right above her knee, and a pretty solid concussion. I mean, the wounds looked horrendous. She was bleeding all over the new cream carpet, but she didn't act as if anything hurt at all, though. She just kept saying, "Thank you. You saved my baby. God bless you. You saved my baby," over and over again as the kid's dad called 911 and rushed an ambulance crew over to the house. They ended up paying me like $200 for a 4-hour gig that night, which in 1987 was practically a king's ransom, especially to a teenager like me. But I don't think my pulse slowed down for a week. I'm serious about that. Sometimes I'd think about catching that baby out of the air and I'd feel like I was going to have a panic attack. I pretty much stopped babysitting shortly after that because it freaked me out so much. Not just the event, but word getting around that I was like some superhero with cat-like reflexes when I'm pretty sure if that happened again, I couldn't grab that baby if I tried. I know that sounds crazy, that I probably just should have soaked up the praise and used it to make a ton more money, but it was all just way too much pressure for a young girl like me. This story takes place all the way back when I was still in high school. In order to earn money to fund my video game addiction, I regularly tutored this adorable little 11-year-old girl. We actually got along so well that the parents ended up asking me to babysit her and her little brother a couple of times. One night in particular, the parents were meant to go downtown to watch a baseball game before a few drinks with friends, telling me they'd be back earlier than midnight. Basic babysitting job, right? Wrong. Right around 8 o'clock in the evening, it started raining pretty heavily. We all lived in a Gulf city at the time, and storms can blow in fast before turning into flooding way fast. Once it became horrifyingly clear that we were in for one heck of a big storm, the parents tried to get home as quickly and safely as possible, but the streets had already started to flood, and apparently they ended up trapped in a parking lot. And the irony was lost on me at the time, but not today. Anyway, the kids' parents called and we agreed I'd spend the night in their guest bedroom. While they booked themselves into a motel, I had the kids go to bed, which was kinda dumb as they got absolutely no sleep thanks to the pounding rain, while I sat up in the kitchen to do homework and watch Netflix. After a little while, I started to notice water seeping in from the back doors. They had a large house with like 3 double doors to the back, so it was a buttload of square feet. I got every towel in the house and started wiping up the water and using the towels to block the door. After this had mostly been cleaned up, I went back to the kitchen table to watch more Netflix. Nothing else much to do, right? But I couldn't have been any more than like 15 minutes later when the power cuts out and all the lights shut off. This freaked me out a bit, but I tried to stay as calm as best I could. And that's when the burglar alarm went off in the other room. I pretty much soiled my pants. I was in the pitch-black house with 2 young kids, surrounded by flooded roads that no one could drive on. After a minute or so of almost blind panic, I realized to my horror I was the closest thing in the house to an adult. There was no one looking after me, in fact. I was directly responsible for these 2 kids. So I grabbed the biggest, sharpest kitchen knife I could find and went to go check all the doors. They were all still closed and no one was in the house, so I called the parents. It turns out the alarm went off when the power cuts out and I just needed to shut it off with a code upstairs. This happened about